Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and being here. You're all already familiar with our speakers, Imtiaz and Mohammed, but I wanted to briefly introduce our co-sponsor for this event, the Multicultural Student Services Center. They co-sponsor the event. They're a department through GW, through the Office of the Provost, and they are a center for students who are interested in getting involved in different cultural events that are related to their identities, and they're just a really great area for inclusivity and really to promote that on campus. Currently, they are promoting awareness of Native American Month. So if any of you are GW students, then just be on the lookout for events that the MSSC is putting on for that particular month. And without further ado, our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Zara. Hello, everybody. Really happy you guys made it out. As you saw outside and on the event itself, this is our Normalizing Dissent campus tour. We're trying to make coming out of Islam a little bit more normal. Currently, it's largely unheard of both in the West and in the East. And just like any other religion, a lot of people disagree with it or have problems with it and walk away from it, especially in the 21st century where it's often talked about the rise of the nuns, where religion is sort of receding from the mainstream in general. Many countries, at least in the West, are majority non-religious. And the same sort of dynamics are affecting our communities as well, except for the fact that people are not speaking out about them for a variety of different reasons. And we want to empower them. So about myself, I'm the president of Ex-Muslims of North America. And it's the first organization of its kind that is dedicated to building communities for ex-Muslims, to empower ex-Muslims, both personally and to help them come out and speak publicly about their problems and their issues and sort of promote change on a broader global scale. In addition to building communities or support groups for ex-Muslims, we've launched a video series that you can see on YouTube, Life Beyond Faith. And that sort of emphasizes how people have left religion and how they're doing afterwards. As religious, when you're surrounded by religion, often it's deemed that if you leave it, it's impossible to live your life without it. And we want to highlight that there are a lot of people from all sorts of backgrounds that have left and are living happy, productive lives. And we have profiled people from Kurdistan, from Lebanon, from Pakistan, from India, from Tunisia, and their experiences after religion and how they left religion. About today, we're going to be talking about specifically what we do as ex-Muslims about leaving Islam, why we leave Islam. So one of the questions we often ask you before that, Imtiaz, why don't you tell the audience a bit about yourself and your organization?
Yeah. Hi guys, I'm Imtiaz Shams. I'm from the UK, if you can't tell from my accent. I'm the chair of a charity program called Faith to Faithless. I say faith a lot, Faith to Faithless. And Faith to Faithless, we work with all apostates, so people who leave high control religious traditions, groups, things like that. We're talking Jehovah's Witnesses who leave, ultra-Orthodox Jews who leave, obviously ex-Muslims, weird cults like the Plymouth Brethren in the UK that no one knows about, and things like that. And our kind of goal is that leaving religion is often very hard for people from high control environments. And this issue is a human rights issue that's not tackled at all. And so we're kind of involved in many ways similarly, kind of focusing on community and the healing from some of the trauma.
One of the great things from my perspective about Faith to Faithless is that it highlights the fact that this isn't just an Islam issue. Islam is a very, very large issue because of the number of people that live under Islam. But any group like ultra-Orthodox Jews or Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons, and as ex-Muslims, that's one of the things we see often, that if you're talking to mainline American Christians, they don't understand what we're going through. On the other hand, if you talk to somebody that is coming from a Mormon background, they immediately catch on because they're going through the exact same thing. They have similar issues with shunning, same with Jehovah's Witness. So it's great that these guys are working on the broader issue itself. So moving on to the topic, one of the things that we're often asked about, why do we use the label ex-Muslim? If we've left Islam, why does it matter? Why do we associate ourselves so directly?
Why don't you just call yourself atheist? Like, you could just be an atheist. We get that a lot from like not just Muslims, but actually non-Muslims as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, what does the word ex-Muslim or the label ex-Muslim mean to you?
For me, it comes from a place of I was so alone. Like I did not know you could leave Islam, right? And this is the experience for a lot of ex-Muslims. You don't even know what it means to leave Islam. So for a long time, I thought I was the only person out of 1.9 billion people who had left Islam. I didn't know that was even a concept. So I thought, am I one of the few people, well, the only person in the world who doesn't think this is working for me? And that finding that identity was like, it was like experience. I can't explain it. It's like, you know, I can't explain it. It's like finding something.
21st century, imagining that you're the only one of anything, no matter what
Anything,
it is.
yeah.
It's a little insane. You can't.
Sorry, that's it. Yeah, I was like, must have been insane because I was like, how could I leave something and be the only one? I must be crazy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's
Not
sort
true.
of. No, it is a very common sentiment. We hear this all the time. I would say it's the most commonly expressed sentiment that I thought I was the only one. Of late, that's starting to change because we've been very active. We've been promoting it, and Muslims have started to notice it. And one of the funnier stories I have regarding that was we were covered in a newspaper in Toronto, and it was a Friday morning, and Muslims have Friday prayers that are a group prayer, and everybody gets together. And during the Friday afternoon prayers in Toronto, at one of the mosques, one of the imams was lashing out at us that this is a sign of end of times. This horrible thing is not only happening, but it's being covered in the newspapers. And we had, in the congregation, we had ex-Muslims that were in the closet that were attending the prayers because to their family, they were Muslim, they had no way out. And they were texting us, telling us, they're talking about you at the mosque. So to me, that's a huge improvement that they are forced to now acknowledge who we are. Going back to the label of ex-Muslim, for me personally, I don't think it's a matter of identity. It's more about a political identity. It's a way to show solidarity. It's a way to show that we have left this religion because it's easier to dismiss. So if Richard Dawkins is speaking, he's somebody that is somewhat foreign. As a Muslim, I knew of Richard Dawkins. I knew of atheists in general, but I never gave them any weight, never any credence because they were those people. They don't understand the truth. They're like, of course, outsiders. And also within Islam, there's this concept that Christianity has been corrupted, Judaism has been corrupted. So it's easy to dismiss them that they were coming from a false tradition and they walked away from a false tradition. Of course, that makes perfect sense. But we have the truth, so of course nobody's going to walk away from the truth. So sort of ex-Muslim draws a line in the sand that we are coming from this tradition and we are leaving this tradition explicitly. And I'm hopeful that down the road it goes away entirely. The ex-Muslim word should not need to exist.
I mean, I want like the next generation of ex-Muslims to be like, that's so weird. Why are you guys fighting about this? I don't care. I'm just like gonna play my Xbox. You know, like it's gonna be normalized. One thing I always say to people when they say, why are you saying ex-Muslim? They always say, oh, but I never hear about ex-Christians or ex-Jews. And that's because you haven't looked at them. There are very large communities that do call themselves ex-Christian, especially in, let's say in the US, where you've got strong evangelical Christian groups and communities in the South especially. You will call yourself ex-Christian often. You won't just say, you're a non-believer. Ex-Mormons, and I think it's a real travesty that this is one of the ways that people try to erase us by saying, well, why don't you erase yourself? Why don't you just disappear? Don't use identity.
If you look at Scientology, for example, they don't want to talk about the fact that people are leaving. They want to hide it. They want to prevent them from speaking out. So it's sort of the same sort of control that nobody leaves, and what can we do to prevent people from leaving? And if they've actually left, how can we bully them into not speaking out? Hopefully down the road we get to a stage, maybe within the next century, where these sorts of labels aren't needed for anybody, be it Jehovah's Witness, Mormon, Muslim, whatever. We're all, enough of us have left that it's not an issue. So one other point that I wanted to make regarding that was that it's also to show solidarity with people that are trapped in theocratic regimes that are suffering as a result of it. So if you look at every single Muslim country, people are routinely arrested. People are routinely murdered for disbelieving, for voicing disbelief. You may have heard of a Raif Badawi. It's a Saudi case where he talked about secularism. That was tantamount to heresy, and he's been jailed for 5 years for that. We have other people here from Bangladesh. So if you want to tell them about the bloggers in Bangladesh.
In Bangladesh, what's been happening is I think always had a very rich dissenting a lot of dissenters in Bangladesh, and we have 10% of our population is Hindu anyway. So it should theoretically be a plural society. But what's been happening is, especially with the rise of strong Islamist movements in Bangladesh, what happens is they find these anonymous bloggers. There's one very well-known blog called organization called Muqtamani, I think, which Abhijit Roy, if you guys have heard of him, was part of, and he was hacked to death in Bangladesh when he was there with his wife. And it's happening time and time again. I know a few bloggers who escaped into Europe, and one of the most interesting things I find is that they're angry, and of course they're angry, and they look at us and go, "You're in one of the few safe places, arguably safe places in the world for ex-Muslims. You should be speaking." So it's in many ways the ex-Muslim identity for me is just as much for ex-Muslims from my country, in the West that I come from, as much as it is for the East. Not because it's some patronizing kind of "I know better than you," but because it's one of the few safe places we can talk about it without all of us getting beheaded, right?
So this is the first time when I met like this has been organized, where ex-Muslims are speaking out publicly, going to campuses, and this is in the United States. Something like this can't be imagined in any other country. In Bangladesh, imagine doing a tour of universities talking about being an ex-Muslim in
Bangladesh, being in my living room saying something about being ex-Muslim would be like, you don't know who's listening,
Growing up myself, I never heard, it wasn't even in the periphery that anybody leaves Islam. Of course, this is it. So we're hoping that as it becomes normalized over here in the West, people that are from Muslim backgrounds understand how bad it is and are willing to at the very least stand up side by side and fight for the civil liberties of their fellow Pakistani, their fellow Bangladeshi, and push for those changes that we all want. Another thing that we're often told by religious people in particular, and sometimes even by non-religious people, that why do you leave? Well, in the West in particular, often it's used as a cultural identity, as you're all Muslim, and we get that from all sides, that why do you have to leave? You have to speak up about it, and isn't Islam part of your culture? The word cultural Muslim is a big part of that. So I wanted to speak a little bit about why people actually wind up leaving Islam itself, if you want to start.
Yeah, I mean, really quickly, just like personally, so I'm British, but I grew up in Saudi Arabia, which is why I have this really weird accent. If you're British, you think I'm American. If you're American, you think I'm British. So I grew up in Saudi Arabia for a decade. And then I moved back to the UK, and what people find quite curious, at least in my personal experience, is in some ways, not all, in some ways, growing up in Saudi Arabia, I had more of a plural identity there than even in London, in East London. Because in East London, for me, I was in a very conservative Islamic upbringing. It was a very important part of your life. Because in Saudi Arabia, you're an theocracy, so there's no identity battle really going on. While in the UK, it's like, well, we're migrant communities, they're against us, we've got to hold on to faith. And so that makes it very difficult to lead. That makes it difficult to even have any kind of real discourse, which actually, I think later on we'll talk a little bit about Saudi Arabia and the statistics around what ex-Muslims, how many ex-Muslims are probably there. And then, I grew up in the UK and was super religious. My first book when I was 7 years old was Riyadh Salihin by Imam Nawawi. It's a collection of hadith, stories of the Prophet. And when people ask me, okay, why did you leave? What I say is, it's not that I have new questions. It's that I had answers to all my questions growing up, but these answers over time stopped making sense. So, for example, I remember when I was a kid, can I go on story time? Okay, story time. Okay, so when I was a kid, I remember reading the Riyadh Salihin, and there's a hadith on Aisha. And Aisha was, it's a hadith, normal hadith, it's a story with context. And she's saying how she was playing with dolls, and I knew she was married to the Prophet. And I was a kid, I was I think 8 years old or something. And I was going, oh, that's a bit weird. I'm that age, playing with dolls, that's a bit different.
But always that little creepy part, I've heard from ex-Muslim girls that growing up, they heard that story and they thought how honored she was at, 8-year-old girls thinking that about Muhammad and Aisha's relationship.
Yeah, no, exactly. There's different ways that these are processed in a young person's mind. In my case, it was, it must be something I don't really know about. And so you kind of move on with your life. As you get older, this question becomes a bit weirder and weirder, and there's always mechanisms to deal with it. oh, this is interpreted wrong, the hadith are wrong, or it's the girls are hit puberty a lot earlier, or it was done at the time, or whatever it is. There's lots and lots of mechanisms. And as I got older, these mechanisms just stopped making sense. They just really stopped making sense. And that's one out of millions and millions of things that kind of went through my head. So the point isn't that I had new questions. It's the way I process information and thought about the answers that stopped making sense to me. So you can see for me, it was very intellectual, but it had a personal impact as well, because I didn't know you could leave it. So for me, it was like, well, okay, what does that mean? And that's, I think, for me, the hardest part of it. It wasn't the intellectual journey. It was realizing what that meant for me and my family and my community and my space in the world.
And generally speaking, pretty much everybody has questions, regardless of what tradition you're coming from. You have questions about those traditions. And often you're not allowed to, even if not explicitly question that, you hear you're not supposed to ask these sorts of questions. These sorts of questions lead you to kufr. So as a result, you shut those down even in your own mind. You're not even thinking about it internally. So growing up, I had similar questions. Most people I know had similar questions. My niece that grew up here in the US, when she was a child, she went to my sister and said, why are there no female prophets? All the prophets are men. And for my sister struggled to answer that. The only answer she could come up with was back in the day, the world was a horrible place, and therefore women couldn't be prophets. On my end, like, I saw stuff in the Quran about slavery, and that disturbed me. But I shelved that away, cognitive dissonance, that this can't be right. God is good, therefore he would never ask us to do anything bad, and therefore I'm reading this wrong. It says slavery, it doesn't mean slavery, it means something else.
Slavery at the time was a different type of slavery.
I didn't go that far. Slavery is just wrong, and God would not do that.
I was a bad person.
So, as an organization, we have a lot of members in various parts of the country, and we have support groups that run. And one of the things we did was we tried to collect some data on why people leave. And to me, it was very interesting. There were a few very strongly defined categories on why people leave Islam. And for the vast majority, not the majority, the large percentage we had was people that stopped believing in God. So it wasn't necessarily just about Islam. The whole ethical framework underpinning God and the idea of God and how we derive morals was eroded first, that the Islamic version of it did not make any sense. So on the other hand, there were also like the other major reasons that you would expect for feminism, of course, like women's rights. And this was really common amongst women, as you would expect that. Again, not a majority, but a significant percentage of women left because they saw when they read the Quran, when they read the Hadiths, that it did not make sense from a women's rights perspective. You're often fed the line that Muhammad liberated women and did wonderful things for women, but when you look at it from a 21st century context, it doesn't make that much sense. One of the other common ones, that this is the one that got me, was science, in the sense that, science is evil from certain perspectives. I've always been an astronomy buff. Growing up, space always fascinated me. Star Trek, Star Wars, whatever. I was really into the space program. And if you look at it from an Islamic perspective, it's a very 7th century idea of what space is. There are 7 heavens above you, which was a Ptolemaic model. The sky is held up by invisible pillars, which the 21st century is a little insane, but if you go back in the day, most creation myths had that. Looked up at the sky, it was there, why is it not falling down on us? So once you look at it from the perspective that we have today and we understand how these things operate, it was very clearly based in a different era. So holding on to belief at that point where you understand how things actually are was untenable. So one of the other things that isn't often talked about or people don't know about is what happens when you leave religion. So in America, for non-ex-Muslims or non-Jehovah's Witness people at least, it's largely, okay, I don't believe, and that is that. Like, you don't have a big conversation. It's not that big of an issue. To each their own, and there are multiple paths to the truth. That's sort of where we are in a good part of the West. In London and England, I think the majority of people are irreligious now. Yeah. In the US, it's lower than, I think it's 25-30%, but it's common enough that it's not that big of a deal. but coming from our backgrounds, it's a whole different ballgame. So why don't you tell us what you've seen in London regarding ex-Muslims and what?
Yeah, I mean, so a bit of background, like I've been involved in community building for a long time, with Mohammed for 5 years, I would say almost. My main involvement has been in the UK and also a group in Australia, and obviously as much as I can being part of Excellent in the US as well. And what I find is that people are generally aware of the whole physical violence aspect, honor violence, the risk around death, things like that. But that actually is a very, very fine, important, but small category of issues that ex-Muslims face. It ranges way beyond that. And one thing I found really interesting is there was one of the Bangladeshi bloggers, or he was involved in the activist in his asylum seeker in the UK. He came to our ex-Jehovah's Witness event for Faith Faithless. And he watched it, and at the end he was sort of crying and coming up to me and goes, Imtiaz, their stories are so horrible. Bear in mind, this is the guy who nearly got killed. He was like, it's so horrible. It's like, with me, they try to kill me. With them, they try to make them hate themselves so they kill themselves. Right? And that, I think, actually represents a lot of what happens with ex-Muslims too. That the emotional violence that we face, the trauma that we face, it comes out in very, very negative ways. You take it out on yourself. Now, what happens with most minority religious communities is that community is very important to you. It's your family, it's your friends, everything it's often your business, it's your school, it's everything. When you take that away, when that rug is pulled out from under you, right? Because these are the same people that help you deal with the ups and downs. So when that rug is pulled out from you, you're already in a down. And then when you're dealing with more downs, you don't have anyone around you. You don't know how to interact with other people sometimes. You don't know who you can trust. You might be trusting the wrong people because you're vulnerable. So that puts you into a very vicious cycle, and you get real issues of self-harm, of homelessness. We've had suicides, as I'm sure you probably have as well, and obviously lots of people who try to kill themselves. And it's a very difficult thing to process. Most people don't understand how difficult. So one of the ways I try to explain it to people is imagine what it might have been like to be gay in the 70s in Britain. That sort of gives people a semi of an idea of what it feels like for ex-Muslims.
And I think it was worse in the sense that at least in the 70s or even before that, you knew that it's a thing. It's a thing. Even if it's a violence, it's a thing. With us, it wasn't even a thing.
We don't even know. Yeah, we don't even know you can. So imagine if who you even are is not even there. It's not. It's not. It doesn't exist. So we talk about existential crises. Every ex-Muslim has had an existential crisis, and that's like the minimum amount of your problem, right? It gets so much worse than that. Then you're thinking, oh, what am I going to do? How am I going to tell my family? If you're a girl, there's layer upon layer of extra issues. If you're LGBTQ, there's a whole level of extra issues. And you're thinking about your past. You're thinking about, okay, why did I do that? Why did I get myself into that place? Why was I thinking that? You're thinking about the present because you're thinking, oh man, where am I going to sleep? What's going to happen when my family finds out? And you think about the future. Who am I going to get married to? Are they going to be okay with that? Do I want to get married? Am I straight? It's just issue after issue.
It's also the consequences to your family itself. So,
yes.
Am I going to get married? Okay, fine. I don't care. My life. But if I do this, it'll bring dishonor to my entire family. What'll happen to my parents? What'll happen to my younger sister, younger brother?
Yeah.
So a lot of people are trapped in that cycle where anything I do will harm all the people that I actually care about, even if they themselves are harming you.
Can I give a real life example? There's someone I'm supporting right now. This person has left, and they're deciding I'm going to leave. But you know what comes with that decision? It's, oh shit, my sister, my younger sister. Maybe they're going to marry her off early. Maybe she can't go to university like I did. Maybe they'll put her in Islamic school. And people often hear about stories about what happens when you go to these not very well controlled madrasas and things like that, Islamic schools. They're thinking, am I going to be beat up? Maybe I should get the police. Like, I don't know how to get the police. Will they believe me, right? So I have to explain to them, maybe the police won't believe you, because I've had cases where the police don't really know how to deal with it. So I have to say, okay, maybe I'll get someone involved who can hold your hand in the police and help you out with that. But can you see how it's not about you? It's so much more than just you when you're leaving.
And the idea that the police doesn't understand is very, very common. Often you have people in positions of authority, counselors, policemen, whatever, they take you back to what you're trying to escape. One of the guys we have, he left his home when he was around 15. He came out to his family was abusive. They locked him up, beat him up. He was able to run away. and he was able to get a job with somebody, graduated high school with honors, like 4.0 GPA, whatever. But in high school, when he finally talked about it, his counselor tried to get an imam involved. And obviously that was insanely traumatic to him. We've seen similar things with police where they view it as the tradition. This is your tradition, this is your culture, and you should comply with it instead of individual adult autonomy. Even if you're an adult, that is what happens. So there's a larger educational problem that we have within the West where they don't understand the consequence of these sorts of issues. And again, I don't think it's limited just to ex-Muslims. Ex-Muslims are particularly vulnerable because they're immigrants, but it happens, I'm sure, in other communities.
Our key focus with Faith to Faithless in the UK right now is we have a project, a training project we've started, a program, where we go to the police, we go to social workers, we go to these people, and we train them how to recognize apostasy. We train them, hey, this is what happens. Yes, people leave Jehovah's Witness. Yes, this is the kind of things they might deal with. No, you should take them to another Christian group. Bad idea, you know, and because that's what they do. Like, the unfortunate truth is, that's what happens. Most of the time I've come across very few of them, and I'm talking about therapists who should be a little bit more aware, where they send them to other Christian groups or, you know, whatever it is.
I don't think it's part of the curriculum to how to deal with the sort of issue where people are leaving high control situations, as you were saying, and how to move out of it. Mainstream abusive boyfriend or abusive parent is a very different paradigm than where your entire community, your entire context is that way, and it's hard for people to comprehend.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
On our end, we've seen this sadly many, many times within the US. The example I was giving of the 15-year-old that ran away, that was actually in the DC area. We've had other people whose families have gotten violent, who have threatened them, who have put guns to their heads. Again, all within the US. We have multiple people whose families have actually tried to kill them, and they've had to go into hiding. There's one guy who, if I remember correctly, has moved 6 times in the past 18 months. Because his family is trying to find him to harm him. And he's moving state to state, getting odd jobs, and they've hired private investigators to try to find him. And therefore, he's largely living off the grid. He doesn't have credit cards. He can't do any of the normal stuff because
He's probably American and he's an illegal immigrant in some country, probably, basically.
the way he's acting, it's worse than that. As an illegal immigrant, you can still have a bank account. There are a lot of things, driver's license, whatever else. He can't do any of that because as soon as he shows up in any system, the private investigators are hired find him. So multiple times he's had to move. Last minute something happened and he just had to head out. Another aspect of that is often for myself, I can speak, and I'm sure there's a similar number for you. I would say 90-95% of people that I love in the world are Muslim. So you try to protect them while you're doing whatever you're doing, your own family, even if your family is abusive towards you. So the person the 15-year-old I was mentioning, he left, he went to high school, he did great. His mom came to him and basically convinced him that things were okay, that we were sorry, we made a mistake. Back in the day, we love you, you're doing great, and we want to be a part of your life. He went back home, and that happened. He walked at home and he found that all of his relatives were there. And there was a sort of an intervention including a lot of physical violence. And he escaped, and he luckily found a policeman while he was getting out of there. He was bleeding and stuff. That was an ex-Mormon. And he understood exactly what was going on, and he helped him out. But
if that police officer wasn't an ex-Mormon, what would have happened? Right?
It could have been a very different outcome. But even after all of that, his family got into some issues, health-wise and finance-wise, and he went back and has been helping them. Because these are people that we love. These are our family. No matter how badly they treat you, it's very hard to say, screw you to your own mother.
Yeah.
Another side of that is that even if you're being abused, often it does come from a place of love. You love somebody and you see them doing something that from a religious person's perspective is horrible, because you will burn in hell forever and ever and ever.
And within the Islamic context, it can be worse than, for example, being a mass murderer or a rapist, because shirk, is the worst thing. Shirk is, what would you describe it as in English? What would you describe the word?
I can think of a word that would be equivalently bad. It's the worst thing possible. You could commit a genocide, and that is less bad.
Shirk is like taking a god beyond the one God, right? So shirk in English is, I don't know, it's like a cuss word. It's like, if you're from a Muslim background, you know that shirk is like shirk. It's like such a nasty word. But that's what we're doing. And that's seen as the worst of major sins, because you have levels of sins. It's the worst of the worst. So you can understand why people who love us, who are Muslim, feel that way. And that's what we're facing, because unfortunately that's the base.
Yeah. So from their perspective, they see their family members going down this path that will lead to eternal darkness. So it's understandable why they would become violent, why they would do these things, because they're trying to protect somebody they love. So even horrible abusive situations can develop out of a position of love. What's needed at that point, I think, is that there needs to be less certainty, there needs to be more doubt, there needs to be the fact that I believe that this is a path towards darkness, but it may not be. I could be wrong. And I think what many of the issues that we see in the Muslim community stems from the fact that I know I'm right, I'm 100% right. And even within the other contexts like political or legal issues within countries and stuff, all of those, maybe not all, but a majority of those, I think, do stem from that moral certitude that they have.
Yeah, it's the difficulty with any kind of totalitarian thinking is it leads to problems across all facets of society. And I think the fact that we even exist actually really helps, because it adds that 0.1% doubt in people that I didn't even know you could do that.
Yeah.
He's not that much of a dickhead, you know.
You know, I mean, you get to know people. Everybody's just a person.
Yeah.
Very, very rarely will you encounter somebody that you will viscerally hate. And when you encounter people that left the religion that you're a part of, no matter how much you may think it's odd or weird or bad or horrible, when you interact with them, they're just another guy or just another girl. So that hate is very hard to sustain at that point.
And it's interesting what you said about love, because I think this is not just something I focus on with ex-Muslims, but also apostasy in general. When ex-Muslims are coming to me for advice, what should I do? I'm going to tell my family, it's definitely decided, but what do I do? What I try to tell them is, okay, do you think your parents actually love you? That's the first thing. The reason for that is some parents don't actually. So in the cases, and the many cases that they do, you can kind of say to them, okay, things are probably going to be fine. It's going to be a long, hard battle. It's going to be fine. With that hypothesis, okay, what can you do now to make your relationship and life easier? So the first is creating boundaries with them, making sure they understand what abuse is not okay, you know, these kind of things. Moving out if you can do it, financially working towards that. Okay, they're going to kick it off. But because there's this underlying hypothesis that they love you, in the long run, it's going to be fine. And I've seen that time and time again. Muslim families do accept ex-Muslims. We don't like to talk about it. Like,
It takes a while. It often takes a decade, even more.
Yeah, exactly. I think as more ex-Muslims come out, that decades get shorter and shorter and shorter. So I've known of families where their children have left and they're an ex-Muslim, but because the community has dealt with that, like they know, you know, oh, Saad's son, he's also like this, it's very bad. You know, but the thing is, you just know that exists, right? So it just makes it a little bit easier. I mean, in my case, you know, I'm from a very conservative background. My family generally are chill with me-ish. You know, so it's getting to the point where it's almost the people who. So a lot of imams will say, "Oh, you cannot." You know, I've talked to a few imams where they say, "No, you cannot do that." I think they're the biggest threat to Muslims because they're centralizing Muslims. They're saying that Muslims cannot be greater. You know, they cannot accept their children. They can because I see them do it. Even Jehovah's Witnesses, where there's a shunning doctrine, where if your child leaves Jehovah's Witness, if you do not cut that child out, you become an ex-Jehovah's Witness as well, which is so scary. Even they accept their children sometimes. So imagine it's not impossible for us.
Love tends to win quite often.
It just takes time. 10 years.
The other thing is going to the Jehovah's Witness part of it about the shunning doctrine. In Islam, there isn't an explicit shunning doctrine, but it still exists culturally. It still exists within communities where if your child leaves religion and you know that like it's an open thing, people know about it, it's expected that you will abandon that child. It's expected that you will shun that child. You will dissociate yourself from that child because that child is viewed as evil. And if you don't do that, then you will be abandoned. And we've seen this countless times where parents have come around and they love their children and they're able to accept them. But as a consequence, they start losing the rest of the family. They don't want to associate with those parents, that these parents are also corrupted by accepting something so vile. So it's a larger systemic problem that we need to address.
And I also think there are also theological issues as well. So, I mean, obviously people know about the hudud punishments within Islamic State about murdering apostates. But beyond that, you know, if you were married and your spouse leaves Islam, I think if it's a male, then as a woman, it's a divorce. It's within most, I think all of the madhabs, the ruling is that that's a divorce.
Yeah.
So when the wife is saying, no, I'm not divorced, I like the guy, right? The problem is that it's been ruled that, like, that's just how it's been seen in the community. So
If you're actually a religious person, like there's one thing where I want to stay with this person and my community is pressuring me, but if you actually believe in God, you believe in God's ruling, then you're stuck in a horrible situation where I'm disobeying God and I will suffer.
exactly, yeah.
So I also want to touch a bit about some common stereotypes, like where ex-Muslims are relatively rare, and as a result, there are certain ways that people perceive us. This exists within the Muslim community and outside of the Muslim community. So one of the words that, and I had never heard of this word myself when, actually I never heard of it until I was out as an ex-Muslim and I started hearing about it. And I'd like to hear your opinion about it. The word native, or phrase native informant.
Yeah, so I mean, that kind of made the rounds a little bit because there was a professor, I think in the US,
In Jersey, Rutgers.
right, who used that term to describe ex-Muslims she was talking about McCarthyites, and it was like ex-Muslims as one of the many native informants out there. And a white convert to Islam who's quite well known in the UK also used that term to describe ex-Muslims. And I was like, what? I was, like, if you've ever grown up in an area where you're a minority and I went to a school that had a lot of racism and anti-Muslim bigotry, especially after 9/11. And when someone just says something that it takes time to process, like, did you just say, like, wow? Yeah. So that was how it felt to me, because I had a white person essentially saying that I'm a native informant, but she's using the mantle of being Muslim as a cover for her racism. And that was very new to me at the time, because I just had never faced that in my life. And I actually sat there being really angry for a while. I think I remember I don't remember if I was talking to you or Sada Haida, but I was like, guys, I'm really angry. And we were like, what are you doing? And then we wrote something and, explaining how, but can you guys all hear me? I realize this is kind of doing this thing. Yeah. Okay. I'll project. And I was stewing. I was so angry. And, I've dealt with, before that, it'd been a while since someone had been racist to me. So you forget what it feels like for a while. I was like, wait, they're talking about me. And then I thought, no, they're not even talking about me, because I'm out there. I can handle it. They're talking about every ex-Muslim who's in the closet, who just wants to live a life. Because that person has decided to leave Islam, they are a traitor to this weird identity that she's created for them.
It's not just her, it's a broader idea.
Yeah.
So the idea is that there's a homogenous block that are all Muslims, they hold these identities, they hold these values, and these are uniform across it. It's sort of erasing the diversity that exists within these various communities. It's sort of like saying that in America, the only valid way of being an American is being a Ku Klux Klaner, or being like whatever essential version of it is. And anybody that diverges from that is wrong and is somehow betraying its culture. So if you're from a Middle Eastern background or a Pakistani background or whatever, your essential identity is religious. If you're an irreligious person, or if you have the temerity to talk about the problems within your religion, you're betraying your essential identity. So the whole construct around it is a very racist construct.
Absolutely. I mean, you see that also in, when you hear people talking about what's happening in Syria and Iraq, if they're Christian, so because obviously Syrian and Arab Christians exist, they often get erased from the conversation because they get seen as, well, you're not Muslim, why are we listening to you? And it's the same problem. So it's a very essentialized view of what it means to be Muslim. And we get the brunt of that.
Not just us, it's everywhere. So, like, you have, 50 odd countries, 1.8 odd billion people, and the idea that all of us agree is a little insane. And so you can say that the Quran says certain things, and the Hadith says certain things, there are scriptural elements, and there are scholars that have certain views. But you can't say 1.8 billion people agree on those views. And by sort of having this sort of paradigms that this is what Muslims are, and diverging from that is trained.
It's like this, oh, that's so cute, you're brown. Oh, your brown ideas are so cute. Oh, wait, you don't think that. Oh, you must be a native informant. You've become white. It's like I really.
An actual phrase is used a lot. You're becoming white.
Coconut. They use the word. Well, the first time I heard the word
That is a
coconut.
common word.
Oh my god! Like I was like, what do you want me to do? I cook Bengali food. I wear kurtas half the time in my life. Like, what do you want me to do? The problem is, it's become such a. It's actually, and it's not. It's not just from outside. It's often from within as well. It's, you know, I've heard this from the Muslim community as well, saying, "Oh, you must be this." I'm like, mate, I know you don't even speak Bangla. Like, what? Yeah, obviously, that's beyond the point. Like, you know, you should be able to express your identity however you want. But the point is that it's a stereotype that gets pushed not just by Muslims. It gets pushed by everyone.
Yeah. A lot in the West, it's the left and the right. Both of them are pushing it in the sense of the right is doing it that all of these people are evil and they're a certain way, and the left is pushing it that all of these people are wonderful and beautiful and amazing. But they're people.
Yeah.
Even in this room, I'm sure there are 100 different viewpoints on 100 different topics. People are different, and we need to recognize that.
I mean, with the right, you were saying, you know, the concept of, I don't know if you guys have come across the concept, which is very new for me as well, taqiyya. You know, it's been used a lot by the right and the sort of far right, and this idea that Muslims are acting like they're nice people so that they can infiltrate the West and turn it into a caliphate or something like that. The problem is, you get ex-Muslims getting that as well. Like, I don't know if you've got that.
We get that all the time. So due to the fact that, as I was saying, my mom is Muslim, my sisters are Muslim, I care about them deeply. Like and even beyond that, like based on a basic principle perspective, like the civil liberties of everybody matter. Even people that want to kill us, their civil liberties matter, to me at least. And due to the fact that I'm saying, talking about the rights of Muslims, talking about the Muslims should have the same liberties that everybody else does, we get this pushback that, oh, you never really left.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, explain. Do you want to tell the story about when you were on Sean?
No, but generally, they only want. So again, this is both shown the left and the right. The right want to use it to further their perception that these are all brown, evil people, and the left want to use whoever they can to further the view that this is all wonderful, which is neither of those narratives are true. So moving beyond the political side of it, there's also a lot of pushback that we get from Muslims. They can't quite comprehend that people don't believe in God to begin with. Where do you become moral? And then the issue that people leave because they think Islam isn't very good to women, or because the idea of God is a little nuts. So therefore, they have their own perspective on why you're actually leaving. Because it couldn't be those reasons you're saying. There must be these other reasons we can tell you about why you're leaving.
And that friend you had when you were young, Tom, he was white. Yeah, we knew it. We knew you should have been talking to Tom.
Or for women, often it's that we let you go to college. You had all these bad ideas in your head now, and therefore we shouldn't have ever let.
I saw that book on feminism on your bookshelf. We knew it. But it's so many things. And if you talk to an ex-Muslim about this, they all laugh. They're like, yeah, oh my God, yes. So for example, it'd be, you know, for women, it's often. You want to be a street prostitute, don't you? You just want to fuck men on the street. That's like you say that to an ex-Muslim woman, they will laugh and say, yes, that's exactly what happened, right?
I would say a majority of ex-Muslim women have heard this from my experience talking to them.
Yes. And then there's, if you're in any way, shape, or form public or anything like that, or even not sometimes, you wanted the money from the Illuminati, right? You're getting that Mossad, that sweet Mossad money. It's like, I don't know, I don't get paid anything for this. You know? We were setting this event, you saw that, we were setting this event up, we ain't got no money.
So, I think a lot of it comes from the fact that it's hard for a religious person to comprehend that there may be valid reasons to leave religion. So if you're giving them a valid reason, that can't be right, because then they have to acknowledge that there are those reasons. So they automatically go to all these 100 other things they can cook up that must be why it happened.
Well, fundamental would be you don't know enough about your faith. That's used quite a lot.
And there have actually been studies in general about atheists that atheists know more about religion than religious people do. And I would bet that the same exists within Muslims as well. So most of you probably know Raza Aslan. He was on a show where he talked about how if you know anything about Muhammad, you know the first thing he did was ban slavery. And there was no outcry from Muslims for various reasons that he's lying. But if you look at the history, Muhammad was a slave, right? He had sex slaves. And it's not that that was anything unique or different or whatever. In the 7th century, slavery was global. Everywhere in the world it happened. a lot of Muslims don't know that because slavery has been abolished, and a lot of them don't go through the scripture, don't read through it. And I'm worried about the same exists within Christian context, that the more ridiculous parts of it, the more horrific parts of it aren't taught. I doubt most Jews are taught that Moses was told to go and kill the Amalekites. It's not a thing, because why do we want to tell them the bad parts? So within the same thing with Muslims, they don't want to tell us the bad parts, that Muhammad got on a horse and flew to heaven to meet God.
I believe that though. I didn't know that. I just thought, Allahu Alam, God knows.
Yeah, so that's what I was saying earlier. You shelve these things that you know can't really be true, that I don't know. And translate the phrase you just used.
Allahu Alam means God knows best. So it's a few phrases, you'll have heard like mashallah and things like that. This is the if you're Muslim,
And it occurs that you don't question things because of the fact that you're a mere human. How can you know the power of God, the will of God, what miracles God can...
Or if you have doubts, this is common across high control groups, and it's a specific mechanism of high control groups. You're having these thoughts, they must be from an external entity, shaitan, Satan, or in some cases, extreme cases, often abusive, you're being possessed by a jinn, like a genie, I guess, in Western, and that can lead to things like ruqya, like exorcisms, right? So you have children, young people who are just expressing doubt, being exercised. It can be very traumatic an experience. You've got imams around you, you've got your mother crying, your father crying, and they're exercising you, and you're 13 years old. This is real situations. That's abuse. And that's what people go through because they don't understand doubt. We don't understand doubt in our communities.
So going back to that 15-year-old that I was mentioning, that whose family was abusive, and he was lured back and beaten when he was 18. When he went at 18, what they did was an exorcism. They did an exorcism first to try to get rid of the demons that had possessed him to make him an atheist. They did that for like an hour or two, and obviously nothing happened. He was still an atheist. At that point, they got frustrated and started beating him.
Yeah, exactly.
So I was talking about the common stereotypes that we face. The other side of it, why do we want to talk about it? Why does the truth matter? A lot of people don't want to have these conversations about Islam, about the problems in Islam, about how people in various ways suffer due to Islam. And the idea often tends to be that it's not the right time, the political climate is bad, people are suffering, why do we want to bring this up? But at least from my perspective, the truth is very, very important. It's essential. If you abandon truth, it distorts everything around us. So we sort of have an obligation to the truth itself. So I would like, I don't know, your thoughts on...
Do you think that the problem with that statement is there's an assumption of what the truth is?
I personally don't, because so you can, for certain things you can say there are subjective answers. My favorite ice cream is chocolate, yours might be different. Chocolate is the best ice cream, I don't know.
It is best.
So there we have, from our perspective, there's an objective truth, chocolate wins. But for other things, we have answers, there are historical facts. Like the slavery thing I was mentioning, it was global, all over the world slavery existed. Muhammad practiced slavery. The Quran mentions certain things about women which map perfectly to the 7th century. So denying those facts make it harder for us to actually navigate this issue and solve that issue. So often what I've seen from Muslims at least is that they want to keep the pristine idea that Islam is perfect and Muhammad was perfect. So they will do a lot of mental gymnastics around it, that there are other things going on, or like the translation issue, or you don't understand this, to prevent acknowledging the truth. And even liberal people that acknowledge that, say, slavery is bad or women's rights are very, very important. They will do everything for their own family, for their wives, for their daughters, to empower them. They still will not be willing to acknowledge that parts of this text or the history is misogynistic, even though, again, that's not anything extraordinary. If you go 500 years into the past in any part of the world and compare it to today, the world was really, really bad. That's nothing unique. But due to the fact that we hold this truth, like this divine truth that it was always perfect, it was perfect for all time, Muslims have a trouble dealing with that, grappling with that. And by not talking about the truth, we make that easier for them, so they don't have to actually reform. In my opinion, at least, you reform when there's a reason, when there's something going on, when there's a pressure on you. So say you're in school and you're not doing well, it doesn't really matter, you won't study hard. If on the other hand, you know that tomorrow you'll be homeless, there's a lot more incentive for you to change, to study, to change the state of where you are.
I remember I once spoke to a professor of sort of racial studies from SOAS, which is a very in the UK it's like very like hippie,
Far left.
well, they do very interesting research and they can be a bit hippie. And I was talking to her about the slavery within Islam, and I had just done a video on it. Like I've been very interested about the actual academic, what do academics say about this history of Islam around slavery. And we were talking about, for example, Omar al-Khattab attacking Dongola and being beaten, and
Maybe give them some context about that.
yeah. Omar al-Khattab was like one of the caliphs, the first caliphs. So it was called Khilafat al-Rashidun, which is like the first 4 great caliphs. And he was also the one who was the most expansionist. He expanded Islam, the Islamic Empire at the time, the widest. And they had, along with another companions, Amr al-Nas, attacked Makuria. The Makurian kingdom is a Christian kingdom. They got whooped. It was the only time they actually had been whooped at that time. But Makuria didn't want to keep fighting, so they had 2 battles in Dongola. And after that, they signed a treaty, a Baqt, and that treaty said 300, it changed a few times, but 300 to 320 Nubian slaves. That was yearly, right? And that kept going for a long time. Now, I spoke to this professor about that, and she was like, oh, I know. And we talked about the issue around slavery, and she said, yeah, I know all this. She's like, I can't talk about it. Professor at the University of Racial Studies could not talk about this. Because what happens is that you do that, there's issues around political correctness, you might lose some funding, you'll have a lot of people protesting you, and so the truth gets buried. And what happens when the truth gets buried is that the issues that we have today also get buried. So, for example, there is an issue of racism across a lot of the Middle East. There is an issue of slavery that's re-emerging. So I don't know if you've seen videos of slavers and slaves in Libya just recently. Why is that happening? This week, why is that happening? That's not just purely because, it's a political context at the time. Of course it is, but they're drawing that from somewhere. And we haven't dealt with it properly yet. And we need to deal with it properly. Because I would say, by and large, we've dealt with the fact that slavery was bad in the West to some extent. We've looked at it and gone, hey, we should have done that. We haven't done that with the Islamic world. And we need to. And what happens when you hide the truth is even professors can't do that.
So one example that I like to draw to that is that if you look at Christopher Columbus and his place in America, back in the day he was regarded as this pristine, wonderful person that came and introduced Europe to the New World, and as a result of this, all these wonderful things happened, and America came into being. But now, looking back, we're looking at it in a more nuanced way. We're looking at his own history, the horrible things he did. He was not a very good man. He did horrible atrocities on the local people, and the same sort of honest critique, honest looking back into history empowers people because we understand where we're coming from. We have a better idea of what happened, and if you don't know history, there's high probability that you will repeat history. And in the Muslim world, they don't know history and they're happy to hide it. So Imtiaz is from Bangladesh, I'm from Pakistan. It used to be one country back in the day. There was a civil war in 71. And in that civil war, Pakistan committed genocide. Hundreds of thousands of Bangladeshis were murdered. And growing up in Pakistan, I did not know this. And this is in living memory. This is 71. And there was no mention of it. It was completely buried. The global press had covered it, but there wasn't enough penetration. I only found out about that when I moved here and I met Bangladeshi people, and they hated me. And they had a very good reason to hate me. And I tried to figure out what was going on. I don't hate you. So if you're able to suppress truth to that extent, there's a lot of secondary problems that happen. And in my opinion, one of the larger issues with the Muslim community is they don't know Islam. And if they understood Islam, if they understood what actually happened, the history of it, they wouldn't be behaving that way because they are good people. Most people in the world are good people. So if we start talking about this honestly, if we don't allow the apologetics to take hold, when somebody lies that Muhammad freed slavery, there's a consequence to that. He's ridiculed for being a childish liar. When other people come on various forms of media and talk about how feminist Muhammad was, there should be ridicule, there should be laughter, because the 7th century feminist, which others do you know? Who are the top 5 feminists from the 7th century that are your favorite? What about the 1st century? It's a concept that did not exist. raping prisoners of war was common because that was what you did. That was what the world was. It's not that these people were more barbaric or those people were more barbaric. That was what the world was. But allowing these people, because we want to be nice to them, because they're a minority, allows perpetuation of these falsehoods that prevents us from actually solving the problem. If the average Muslim in America understood that Muhammad enslaved people, he raped people, he had child rights, whatever else, that doesn't mean that you dehumanize people. You can have honest conversations about the past, and Muslims will talk about the fact that they disagree with that. There may be some angry discussions, but the facts exist, and they will have to accept those facts as they exist. But if we're not willing to have the conversation, why would they bother?
And we all, at least within the ex-Muslim world, we always hear stories about sort of young kids going to their parents and going, like with your, like going, oh, why this? And the parents will be like, we don't say that. The point is that these conversations are already happening in many ways. They just get
because the kids themselves are inquisitive and looking into it directly themselves. The books exist. You don't need a third party. But we need to change the public perception itself. And again, going back to the West, I don't think we often hear that in the 15th century, the Spaniards were a particularly evil people, and they were doing these horrible things around the world, and we should revile Spanish people today because of their past. That's not just the case. We understand that was a different time when Columbus was doing what he was doing. That was a different era, and the people there were doing horrible things because that was the context they were embedded in. And we judge Spanish people today by what they're doing today. And there's no reason we can't do that for Pakistani people, or for Bangladeshi people, or for any of these other groups.
It's interesting because we treat Islamic history as historically we treat it as this kind of unique occurrence.
Propaganda.
Yeah, it is because if someone came up to me and said, "Oh, I look at the Crusades that happened as fact, and I want to reenact that today," I'd be like, "You're far right. You're crazy," and you could imagine that would lead to probably slightly bad ideas. Not as bad because maybe people are good, but it's not good to look at things ahistorically. And I think even beyond what the truth is, for me personally, we might disagree slightly on this, as on many things, but for me, what's more important is having any kind of room to discuss. What the truth is, I don't even know. But the point is that you can have room to discuss. We just don't have that today. It doesn't exist at all. This is why some of the most interesting conversations I've had about Islam do come from ex-Muslim communities, because that's where people can feel safe. They can, defend Muslim positions, defend ex-Muslim positions, It's interesting.
So you can find beauty within Islam itself. It is an amalgam of many, many ideas. Some are good, some are bad. A lot of them are outdated because of the 7th century, but that doesn't mean that it's all bad. So personally speaking, one of the better things in Islam is there's an emphasis on charity. You're supposed to give 2.5% of your savings, not your income, your savings, every year to the poor, which is wonderful. There may be some conversations about whether you should be forcing people. There's a certain libertarian perspective that it's wrong, but the idea still being that the state, maybe not state, God himself or herself, want you to give money to the poor. That is a wonderful idea. It will help people and will make society better. So, going back to the part about truth, ISIS is theoretically defeated, but before that we had Al-Qaeda, before that we had other groups. I think all of it goes back to the same thing, that even the Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia, they're trying to bring us back to the original Islam. There's a word, Salafi, which means basically going back to the origins. And so if we understand what the origins are, if we don't romanticize the origins themselves, there will be less of an incentive to try to go back to them. So growing up myself, I was raised on stories of the wonders of Muhammad and his people and how they liberated the world and how even the word democracy was used. Again, that wasn't the thing, but it was in the book of Abu Bakr. So if you have a certain romanticized view of history, you can plausibly look at that and say that, okay, these guys made the world wonderful for people that were suffering, and maybe we can do that again by copying exactly what they did.
I spoke to a guy who brought the Muslim Brotherhood to Qatar. I can't remember his name now. So the Muslim Brotherhood, if you don't know, is like a political Islamist movement to bring Islam to the Arab world, generally the Arab world, through political movements, and he said something very funny because he used to be Ikhwani, he used to be Muslim Brotherhood, but he's not anymore. And when he was coming to Britain to visit, he said, "Oh yes, a bunch of I can't do the accent here, but he said a bunch of Salafi brothers contacted me, not realizing that I had left." And they wanted me to speak. And he said, "Are you sure you want me to speak?" They said, "Yeah." So he's like, "Yeah." So I was speaking, and the Southern brothers were very angry. They came to me and they said, "Why are you saying this? The caliph, the caliphate is like the best example." And he said, "Okay." He said, "Okay. Let's say it's the best example." He said, "Okay. What happened to the first caliph? Oh, he died in 2 years. What happened to the second caliph? He was murdered. The third, he was murdered. The fourth, he was murdered. The fifth, he was a monarch for 150 years. And then you have the Abbasid Empire, which is another essential monarchy." And the guy was like gobsmacked because he hadn't thought about it. But if you're studying this, it's actually obvious because that's what Islamic, like, this is not like weird. This is
Exception of academic history. This is coming straight from Islamic history. They themselves acknowledge it.
It's weird, but there's just none of these narratives. They all get buried under essentially propaganda. And that one conversation you might have had could have stopped that person from actually believing in bringing the caliphate through whatever means, which may be legal, which may be illegal, because there's different ways to bring it about, in doing so. And this
Goes back to the same thing. If you romanticize it, you're trying to make the world a better place. This thing made the world a better place, so why should I not try to make it? Everybody that I personally know that became super conservative and tried to go in that direction, they were good people. They were trying to do the right thing. They were trying to help humanity. And if you want the world, so in a lot of our countries, you see there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of misery, there's a lot of poverty, and you know that this answer exists and this answer will bring you to a better place. Why would you not do it? It makes perfect sense.
I mean, I remember growing up. It was one thing after another. It was Chechnya. So we'd have like in the masjid the sermons. They would be like crying and praying for our brothers and sisters in Chechnya. Then it was the next battle. Then it was the next battle. Then it was the next battle. And what happens is you get young people who want to make a difference. They hear this thing and go to the imam. What can I do? Or maybe someone in their peer will say, "I have the answer for you," and that's how recruitment happens. So it's not that it's not that all ideas are violent, but you have to have some dissent. Otherwise, getting to a concept where to bring change requires some level of violence is not a ridiculous logical link. It's not difficult.
Even besides violent theocracy. So if you look at Muslim countries in general, pretty much all of them have God in their constitution, not in the so like in Pakistan, the constitution, all laws must be subservient to the laws of Allah. So it is essentially a theocracy. And if you're never having conversations about why theocracies are bad, then of course people will gravitate towards theocracies. And Muhammad himself established the theocracy in the beginning, and Muhammad was perfect. So theocracies work. So ultimately, it goes back to the same thing again and again, that we need to have honest conversations about what Islam was, at least historically, at least scripturally. And we need to clarify that Muslims are not what the scriptures say. The scriptures talk about slavery, it's A-okay. The scriptures talk about sex slavery, it's A-okay. We don't have data for it, but I'd be willing to bet 90 to 99% of Muslims are against that idea. They don't know their history, they don't know their religion, but most Muslims are better than what their scriptures are, better than what their prophet was. So I wanted, we're running out of time, but I wanted to briefly touch on this because this amuses me a bit, because people often talk about ex-Muslims the same way, that we're all the same, or we're all right-wing, or we're all left-wing, or we're all native informants, or whatever else. But even within, as with any group of people, as with the people in this room, there is always a difference of opinion. And there's a lot of tension within ex-Muslim communities about a variety of topics. We disagree on pretty much everything. So from your experience, what's the most disagreed upon topic among ex-Muslims?
I think where I've seen blood and guts is around the topic of hijab and niqab, whether it should be banned or whether it's part of the civil liberties of all. I think that's probably where I've seen the most.
And some of it, in my opinion, comes from the fact that a lot of people have suffered under it. If you suffer under Islam, you are worried about the symbolism of it, and you want to erase the symbolism of it. So hijab for certain people means that it represents Islam, which has oppressed me and has been violent towards me, or I have been jailed because of it. Therefore, I don't want to see it. And it's there's comparisons that I've seen people make with the Confederate flag, because that symbol similarly invokes some horrible feelings and horrible history. So for a lot of ex-Muslims, that is the case. I wouldn't say a lot, but a certain amount. But on the flip side, you also have women that have gone through that as well. And their perspective often is that if you're going to try to ban this, I will be the one that will be affected back in the day, like a younger self. I wouldn't be able to go out, I wouldn't be able to live my life. So,
Or they say it has a backfire effect because, for example, with the niqab, at least the people I know that wore it just chose to wear it. Not to say all of them do, but in my circle, in my life, there were women who went from the hijab to the niqab because it was like a statement they were making. So guess what happens when you try to ban something, anything? You're stifling the conversation and you're pushing people to wear it more, I guess.
yeah, you're pushing them to embrace that identity instead of having a broader, multifarious identity. As a Muslim person, you could be Pakistani, you could be Bangladeshi, you could be Saudi, you could be 100 different things, and you could have various aspects. And even within the Islamic context, you could embrace certain parts and not embrace certain parts. So again, the Christian parallel, homophobia is within the scriptures. Christianity has it, Judaism has it, Islam has it, but a good chunk of Muslims are not homophobic. But if you're pushing them in that direction, that there's only one essential Islam, and there's only one way to look at it, scriptures aside, then people will band together and try. It will become more conservative as a result of that. So we're running out of time, sadly. So one last thing that I wanted to cover was often we're asked, what can other people do to help out in this? And Imtiaz, what do you think? What can others do?
So when people come to me, I mean, obviously my context is the context of faith to faithless, which is for apostasy in general, but the issues are similar. So beyond, I mean, funding is one really important one. We're poor, so poor, Mossad has not pulled that yet. The Illuminati is still hiding in the shadows. So we're very poor, and so that means resources are important. That includes helping us get grants and things like that, because we don't really know how to do anything like that. But beyond that, we have, for example, a project to train social workers, police forces, and things like that, and how to deal with apostasy. Well, we need to get into these social workplaces, these police forces, and things like that. So one thing I say is, can you get us in? And I think with you guys, the key thing would be policy and media and things like that, because you're about raising awareness.
Yeah, so if there's people that have connections that you do think maybe beneficial, reach out to us. If there are media platforms that would want to talk about this issue, inform them about it. For a lot of people, they haven't heard about this issue at all. People don't know about it. So from that perspective, you can talk about it amongst your own families, amongst your own friends.
I think that's a really important one, actually, because what I found, so when we were speaking in Atlanta, this guy came up to me who was a police officer. Yeah, okay, I can say this. He was a cop for the venue, right? And he came up to me going, hey, I really like to talk. And he explained his situation with his partner, who was from a Muslim heritage like us. Whether she was an ex-Muslim or not is sort of, I don't know, and I didn't ask. But the point is they were having problems. And he's going to go back and talk to her. He's going to talk to his community about the fact that we exist. He's a white dude who didn't know anything about Islam before dating this girl. And the point is, you can talk about us. You can talk about our existence. You're in a position in many ways to take a step that actually a lot of ex-Muslims can't even, because they can't talk about it. As soon as they do, people think, oh, wait, maybe you are. But if you're not from that background, you will know people you can talk to about this. And I think that makes a big difference. I've really seen it make a big difference, at least in my life.
I know, definitely. The other thing is that there's a need to hold people accountable when they say things. If they're talking about Islam, whether they're actually being true, if they're whitewashing it, if they're pointing it out, even something as simple as the 7th century, that doesn't make sense. If somebody's going to claim that they did Muhammad invented feminism in the 7th century, you can push back at that. That doesn't make any sense. What evidence do you have to back that up? And just having the conversation may help them out of their illogical position as well. The other thing is often we hear about alliances between the left and Muslims, and on the one hand that's great because it pushes Muslims to sort of embrace liberal values, because they can't. So we often hear even from conservative Muslims that we accept gay rights. And they're forced to do that because that is what is going on in the culture right now, and they want to continue to be embedded within the left, and that's sort of the price to pay for that. But the other side of it is simply saying that I support gay rights is very different than I'm willing to fight for the rights of the gay people in Saudi Arabia. I'm willing to condemn homophobia within Muslim communities. That's a very different conversation than simply stating it in America about Americans. So if we're having them as allies, we need to be sure that they're actual allies in every way possible. And we need to have those difficult conversations that they will probably share.
I mean, the last thing I would say, just because I know we're running late on time, is for Muslims, one thing that I really respect is when I hear an ex-Muslim tell me, oh, I came out to my, we use the word coming out as well, I came out to my friend or my brother or my cousin or whatever, or my dad, and it was difficult, but they've said, you know what, no matter what, I love you. And these are Muslims making that decision. These are Muslims actually saying, and it's risky for you because you're doing something that might be shunned upon in the community, frowned upon in the community. But we really need that. So we need that as a first step. And the second step is, can I story? 5 story. So when I did one of my first events, it was an all ex-Muslim panel. We tend not to do that now for Faith to Faith. We have a mixed panel. This was one of the first events at Surrey University. We were talking about our experiences leaving Islam. Now, obviously, under that, we talk about Islam, but not really. For us, it was much more talking about the experience. And in the back row, there was sort of a bunch of the Islamic Society people, the ISOC people in the back. And one of the guys stood up and asked a question, saying, well, not questions, kind of ranted at us, going, oh, yes, violence is bad, but why did you leave Islam? You didn't talk about it, probably you didn't study it. And what happened is a Muslim woman, I know she was Muslim because she was wearing the hijab, and I spoke to her afterwards, and she stood up and said,
hey, you don't know, actually, hijab, it could be an ex-Muslim too.
That's why I spoke to her afterwards. But you're right, actually, I love it. Anyways, so she stood up, and she was also ranting, she was like, I've been sitting here the whole event. They've said nothing like that. This is their experience. If you wanted to rant to them, you could have talked to him afterwards. And he shut the fuck up because what's he going to do, right? And I think that's so powerful. And that's what I look out for because I have a lot of Muslim friends even now. And they're specifically people who, shouldered up and said, you know what, actually, this is a problem. I'm going to support you guys. And it's a real honest type of support. And I think we need, as ex-Muslims, we really need a lot of that from Muslims as well.
Again, it goes back to a lot of Muslims aren't aware of the problem. They're unaware of the scope of the problems, even within their own country. So if we talk about like the 13 countries where you're killed, we talk about government policy where people are being hunted down, Muslims will be forced to take a position. And many of them will take the right position because they are good people. We'll move over to a Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, please raise your hand.
Hello, so I recently joined to your community activists of North America. One question I have earlier, you mentioned like Muslims don't care when the arguments come from outsiders. So what is the effect of outsiders in the Muslim world now, do you think? Is like, in some cases, people like Richard Dawkins or when they don't have a good handle on the arguments, they might even cause people becoming more conservative.
No, I disagree with that. So the thing is, it's not that they don't have an effect, it's that the effect of somebody, your mother or your child or your sister, saying, I don't really believe this, is much more powerful than somebody that is from a different race, from a different culture, saying similar things. So it's much more powerful when we speak about it, when you speak about it with your family, than when Richard Dawkins speaks about it. But we see this all the time. Like when people join our community, we have a sort of a process where we get to know them first before allowing them in for security reasons. And in those conversations, time and time again, we see that somebody says that I saw a Richard Dawkins video and I was pissed off, and I saw another and I was really mad. And 6 months later or 3 months later, I'm an atheist now. And it's not just Richard Dawkins, it's Sagan and Matt Dillahunty. And there was somebody illegally without getting copyright, translated Richard Dawkins' book, and within, I think, the first week, 9 million copies were downloaded in Arabic. So there is a real thirst for that sort of literature, and often it doesn't exist. And what I was saying earlier was that a lot of people in the West are leaving religion the same, and they're leaving religion because science is advancing to such an extent, and human rights values are advancing to such an extent that it becomes not tenable to hold on to religion. The same phenomenon is occurring in the East as well.
Yeah.
Hi.
It's not
Yeah,
a
it's
mic.
on,
Yeah,
okay.
it's just recording mic. If you can talk loudly, so. For
Okay,
everybody.
so, well, first of all, I'm really glad that you guys are here, and I'm a Muslim. I still am not, I don't consider myself to be an ex-Muslim, but I'm glad that both of you are very, knowledgeable about the religion, as well as you spoke about some of the good things about the religion as well. I think from a Muslim perspective, somebody who's not religious, but is somewhat in the middle, is where I would stand. I think it's important that you guys have that, bring out some of those things or be able to connect to people. If you call yourself an ex-Muslim, right away you've kind of like distant people who are willing to listen to, to your argument, to your point of view, to go and, gather history and stuff about some of the facts that you may have present, or get them to your side, or because there are problems within the Muslim faith that we all acknowledge that need to be worked on. But I think if it comes from somebody who they consider, oh, this person is an atheist, he doesn't know. Right away, you've kind of like distanced yourself. And that's part of the problem with Muslims, is there is no one who can bring those people who are on the extreme, or in some cases, people would consider you guys to be on the other extreme. You know what I'm saying? So.
So there was a Vice documentary that I was involved in, and they were like, hey, we want you to write an article. And I'm a terrible writer, so I was like trying to think, what am I going to write? And what came to my head is, and this is an answer back to you, do you know what the word for ex-Muslim in Arabic is? It's murtad. Murtad is a cuss word. The word atheist and agnostic generally get an apostate. Apostate in Jehovah's Witness context gets used as a cuss. There's actually, we were thinking about this, sitting in a board committee of Faith to Faith, going, wait, what words are there for non-religious that are positive? There are none. Right? In the Muslim context, they're actual cuss words. Like you would say something, even if you're a Muslim and a Muslim wants to cuss you out, they'll be like, oh, you're a murtad, or you're a, zindiq. So they're cuss words. There are no words to describe us that are positive anyways. I sometimes use the word cultural Muslim that riles a lot of ex-Muslims up the wrong way as well, including yourself. There's a reason for that, but it's different. But I also use the word ex-Muslim, and for me, it is a very important thing for me to claim that. The reason Muslims feel uncomfortable with ex-Muslim, when I've thought about it long, hard, is because it's a cuss word. There's no word to describe me. What is there? Atheist, agnostic, well, that's a cuss word as well, actually, as far as a lot of Muslims are concerned. So the way I've learned to deal with it is, that is an identity I've chosen for myself, right? I will, whether I'm an asshole or not, will be spoken for by my actions and my treatment of my fellow woman or man or animal or planet. And the point is that that's what I think speaks louder than words. And that's worked as far as I'm concerned. We have so many more ex-Muslims now in the public that it's becoming kind of difficult for Muslims to actually cuss us out all the time. Well, they do, but it's harder. And I am coming across Muslims like yourself who are like coming to these things, who are trying to engage. And that's an honest, it's a heartfelt question. And I have to help you understand, hey, man, imagine if you left, what would you call yourself? There's nothing. So we have to start somewhere. And ex-Muslim reflects what other people do as well. So they say you're an ex-Mormon, you're an ex-Christian, you're an ex-Jehovah's Witness. So it's not doing anything new, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but the only thing is the intent, I guess, for which I feel like that you guys have the same intent, is to bring improvement within Muslims, the people who are not.
So you're sort of talking a little bit about reform, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
So not necessarily just about reform. So the point is that we want to be, one, honest about who we are. We are atheists. We don't want to lie about it. And the other thing is, in order for change to happen, in order for dissent to be accepted, there need to be the visible dissenters. And it doesn't get more visible than I think your entire worldview is just false. We're not even talking about morality, it is just outright false. So Muslims are forced to confront that, even if they hate us, even if they dislike us. There's that conversation that happens on why. And in my opinion, it's important to expand that sphere of that conversation. And ex-Muslim is able to do with that, and in my opinion, very few other terms have been able to.
Hi, my name's Amir, and I moved here from Pakistan about 2 years ago. Great event.
I can tell by the way you said Pakistan.
Yeah,
otherwise
right.
you say Pakistan.
Pakistan, yeah.
bothers
So
me, yeah.
great event. I mean, it's so important to talk about these issues. I want to know your opinion on reform of Islamic texts. And do you feel that that would help A, Muslim communities evolve, and B, work better acceptance of ex-Muslims as well?
We have a difference of opinion on this.
Also, we just did a 3-hour event like 2 days ago, specifically, actually 5 days ago, specifically on
So watch this on YouTube. No.
Yeah, in a few weeks it actually will be on YouTube. It's a long discussion with Imtiaz, myself, and Armin. But I personally am against the idea of reform, not from the perspective of, but from the idea that why should we reform? It is false. So why should we try to reform something that is false when we understand the universe better, when we understand everything better? We can just skip it. It's like asking somebody that is from a third world country that doesn't have certain facilities, that first you must develop the 18th century facilities, then the 19th, then the 20th, then you're allowed to catch up to us. Why? We can sidestep that. We have the truth already. We understand it.
Yeah, do you want to?
His name escapes me at the moment, but there's a judge in the state of Minnesota who was involved with a de-radicalization program for a young man who attempted to join the Islamic State, was caught very early on by the FBI. And instead of giving him the more severe punishment that many of his cohorts got, he was entered into a de-radicalization program. And there's a similar one going on in Syria for ex-ISIS fighters. I was wondering, what role do you think, if any, the ex-Muslim community has in working with de-radicalization programs to sort of introduce more liberal ideas and greater ideas and possibilities to people who have become more radicalized by Islamic thought?
I think our existence is kind of a bit of a derad movement in some ways, because the problem with radicalization is, and this is not just for Muslims, if you look at any kind of radicalization, it tends to occur when you've sold this totalitarian view, right? So I think the fact that ex-Muslims even exist can make a big difference. I've seen that in my personal life with people that I've seen become quite extreme. The fact that I even exist makes them double think, because if you're going to kill yourself or kill other people because you think there's a heaven and you're going to get heaven points by doing this, if you think Jannah points, there we go. If you think that, oh wait, there's a 1% chance that, wait, there's someone who's an ex-Muslim, I didn't know you could leave it, it's going to make you double think your Jannah points. So just the fact that we exist, just the fact that any kind of dissent exists is a big difference. And this is also where I slightly differ on the idea around reform. I think it can help, but that's a completely different. We had a long 3-hour discussion, debate, shouting at each other. Thank you for that. No, we didn't. Beyond that, I'm a bit wary about de-radicalization efforts and ex-Muslims being involved in it somewhat, because we're already so politicized that for me, I'd much rather that we focus on the ex-Muslim community and the work we're doing to further our human rights, because that whole area is so politicized. It's a bit of a tense thing to get involved in. That's not to say I don't think ex-Muslims can help. I think they absolutely can help, and that's their right to. I just stay somewhat away from it.
I would add that I think, like what you were saying about de-radicalization, that ex-Muslims in itself is a de-radicalization program. It's not for ISIS, it's not for current radical people, but it's for the next generation, so they don't become radical. If you're surrounded by, say you have a social circle of 20 Muslims, and among those 20 Muslims, 3 are atheists, and Islam tells you that you should murder atheists, and this is a buddy from 3rd grade. Yeah. It's hard to go to that extreme place anymore.
We have one over there.
Thank you. I am very politically active on the left, and as you mentioned earlier, to just talk about ex-Muslims and to talk about this issue and to just make people aware that you guys are out there. I'm trying to have those conversations both within my family and within my political community. But one thing that I've noticed, and it really scares me, is how institutionalized the oppression of dissent is becoming. I don't know if you guys know, but Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Asra Nomani testified before the Senate a couple months ago, and it was ostensibly about homeland security, but it touched a lot on their experiences as ex-Muslims. And they just got ignored, frankly. And they published a piece on it in the New York Times where they talked a little bit about why this was, why being ignored was so, was a form of oppression. And even people, commenters and readers and writers in the New York Times, which is ostensibly sort of a leftist paper, backed up the Senate and accused Hirsi and Asra of being, as I guess as you guys said, what was the term that you used again?
Native informants.
Native informants. And like Majid Nawaz of all people has been added to the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of Islamophobic extremists, which is just, he's Muslim.
Extremists.
Yeah, and that, when you have like these big name organizations like The Nation or New Republic or Southern Poverty Law Center, institutionalizing the quelling of dissent, it makes it so much harder to have those conversations just as a single person or as a single activist. What do you have to say about that?
Oh man, I agree with you so much. I hate this so much. I can't even tell you. So like, what's been very interesting for me is most ex-Muslims that I've come across. I mean, a lot of them, have all sorts of political views. A lot of them are left, actually. A lot of them come from the left. Some of them even come from the far left, God forbid. In my background I was involved in the left quite a bit when I was younger.
I would like to add that most people in the ex-Muslim community that I've seen are usually on the left. They're usually not far left because they see the problems in the far left, but they're somewhere between the left and center left.
Yeah, so the center,
I was actively involved with anti-war efforts with Iraq and a bunch of other left, like Obama. So, in that case, sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no, exactly, and I think it's symptomatic of the problem we're talking about, which is that it is the biggest hurt. We were talking about this actually, weren't we? Like, we were talking about this a couple of days ago. We were talking about almost the hurt that it feels, because if you come from that background and you did think that there was a defense of
Good guy.
yeah, you were like, the left are cool, and then it's like, whoa, they're racist. Oh my God, that's racist basically, because what they're doing is they're looking at people. So for example, Ayan Harsi Ali, who you can have any view about her on her politics, she is still a woman who left something, and it's very difficult for her, no matter what people say. Someone like Linda Sarsour going to her and going, she shouldn't have her vagina, right? You take it away, as someone who, FGM is an issue in that community as well. I mean, wow. And do you know what happened? No one in the left really said anything. I mean, there's a few bits and bobs here and there, but what else aside from that? And I think that problem about institutional oppression, which is funny because that's generally what the left talk about. They talk about institutional oppression. So it is going to be one of the big, I think, challenges of the left to deal with this internal institutional oppression in their time. I don't know how we're going to do it. I think why we talk about it so much is because it's such an important problem, and by talking about it, it helps. But I think actually a lot of it is going to come from leftist activists like yourself, embedded within these places, because you're the guys who can try to bring us in. One thing I've seen, for example, when we've tried to do events at universities, is before we contacted like atheist, secularist, humanist societies, we did contact like feminist societies, LGBT societies, things like that. And the way that they discriminate is not to straight up what they do sometimes, to say, oh, you're offensive. We've had people say, you're going to offend people. But actually the worst way is they kind of back off really slowly, or they mislead us and they say they'll do something that they don't. But if we've got people on the inside who are like, you know what, I want to help. How can I help? You might only have a small amount of power, but that can actually add up over time. And as people are becoming more aware of this issue, it's going to become more and more apparent that you've got other allies in the left. So I do know a few leftists now who are very outspoken. They've had enough shit. They're like, F this, I'm gonna say what I want. And those people are great. And I think we need more like that.
So we can affect changes from within current institutions. You don't necessarily need to be 100% outspoken. To whatever extent you can helps. So like you were saying, inviting people that would otherwise not be invited, raising funds for people that would otherwise not get funds. There are a lot of different ways that, and even from a policy perspective, so say you're a part of a policy-making committee on some smaller subgroup within the left, you can affect how they view things. You can make sure that they're not essentializing Muslim into wonderful or horrible. And there are a lot of little things you can do here and there. So with the ACLU, they're inviting Linda Sarsour as a keynote speaker. Okay, fine, it's up to them, they can invite whoever they want. But if there are people in the ACLU that are voicing disagreement on this person said these horrible things about other activists and has some anti-Semitic views or whatever, there may be other people that also hold that view, but weren't saying it. So the first person that says it may empower 10 other people to say it and to change the direction they're going right now. So it's important that you find allies, and it's important that you do whatever little you can do, because when we started, there was nothing.
Yeah.
And within only like 4 years, we're here organizing a tour around the country. Things have changed just within a short 4 years. You never know how much change you can achieve unless you start trying.
We were literally just people on the internet. I know this sounds like a joke. It was not a joke. Literally just anonymous people on the internet. Not a joke. So if we can do this, and I barely know how to use a computer, you all can do it as well.
I just wanted to add real quickly, you said they didn't do anything about Linda Sarsour. She was actually a co-chair of the National Women's March after saying a woman shouldn't have a vagina. So imagine if Ann Coulter said that and then they made her chair.
It's the same thing, isn't it? But because she's essentialized, they're not going to do that.
Yeah.
I find that you have a very interesting, kind of very difficult position because you're kind of in the middle where it's not a win-win situation anyway, because you have from the right, I see that there's some commentary from the right where they actually make some of the very valid criticism towards the extreme views of fundamental Islam, but they come from a kind of a racist bigotry, and they use you guys also as a way to validate their point. And now you have from the left, which should be kind of a natural ally to you, also kind of protect Muslims, but also through the bigotry of low expectations.
Exactly.
So it's just this, how do you do this? It's just,
Have you seen
where
the
do you
magazine
go?
in this man's eyes? I mean,
So it's bigotry from both sides.
And Muslims that want to murder us. So it's a good place to be. But ultimately, this is something that we have to do. Progress is never easy. We know this throughout history. Every advancement that we've had throughout history, people have fought and died for. And if we want a better world for tomorrow for our children, we have to do this. We have no other choice. We have to take the difficult stand within our organization, the difficult stand within our families, and we have to force this change to happen. Otherwise, we'll all suffer in the long term.
Hi, how are you guys doing this evening? So my name is Amin, and much of the sentiment that's been expressed I very much agree with in terms of having an open environment where dissent can be expressed, and the academic freedom to do so amongst many academics. What I wanted to express is just a concern about the way in which, for a lot of Muslims, I feel, I'm a Muslim, and I feel that for lots of Muslims, oh, you're very welcome. I appreciate you coming out as well. And I think, as I've mentioned, that platforms of this structure should be encouraged so that people are able to hear other people's ideas and have ideas that are in dissonance hashed out and ironed out. Where I feel the hesitation is for a lot of Muslims coming out to certain events like this is that they feel as if their religion is somewhat being essentialized. And you've mentioned the idea of essentialization as to for Muslims actually doing the essentialization when they sort of deem Islam as this whole encompassing theology, which anyone who expresses any dissent, they're therefore disagreeing with Islam. But I feel as if Muslims feel that that is the exact same certain platforms like this nature are doing in discussing Islam and how it sort of it has this theology that sort of perpetuates the lack of dissent, that sort of perpetuates intolerance and these sort of things. And there are lots of Muslims that don't necessarily carry this sentiment. There are lots of Muslims that don't necessarily believe in this particular conceptual idea within the faith, and they're certainly available. So I just wanted to ask the both of you if you have come across those voices, and how are you sort of incorporating them into certain events like this?
So one distinction I'd like to make regarding the religious part of it. So there's one thing to say Islam as you practice it, your perception of Islam. There's another to say what the scriptures say. There's another to say how Muhammad lived his life. So according to Islamic biographies, the Sirah of Muhammad or the Hadith, there are certain things that he did that are not good from a 21st century perspective. Same with the Quran. But I'm 99.999% sure that you're a better person than Muhammad ever was. And for Muslims, that's a hard sell because you view this person as perfect. So when I'm saying that Islam is X, Y, and Z, I'm generally talking about the scriptural elements. I'm talking about the history. I'm not talking about Islam as you practice it or as you believe it, because it also varies within countries and areas. So FGM is something that is condoned in every Sunni Muslim school, Shafi, Hanafi, so on and so forth. But it's not practiced across the board because it depends on which sub-school you're in. Shafi mandates it. So in Somalia, in Indonesia and stuff, it's widespread. So there are variations there. We can look into that, we can acknowledge that. And even within those areas, it's not 100%. There are Muslims that say, yeah, I'm not going to do that, even if my religion says it. So we need to acknowledge that there is the distinction between Islam as a set of ideas and Muslims as people who hold a subset of those ideas. No Muslim holds the entirety of all the ideas of Islam. I don't think that's actually even possible. So that was the sort of distinction that I would draw.
I mean, yeah, and I would by and large agree with that. I think if I was just kind of stretch your question out further and also push it towards the direction I think you were trying to hint at as well, I mean, I'm surrounded by a lot of Muslims, and because many of them would be considered progressive, I would have had to actually engage with some of these different concepts. The issue I have is about literalism. So there are many faith backgrounds that are not literalist, and so they can engage with difficulties in their text quite easily. Well, it's up for interpretation, it's off the time. With Islam, even within a lot of progressive circles, what the issue is actually literalism. So there was I've told this story before, but there was a well-known, quite progressive Muslim scholar who was in the UK, and this changed my mind on a few things, who was reading Surah Al-Kafirun, right, which is the Surah of the Kuffar, basically, and making it out to be this like the kafir is like a disbeliever, but it can be it can be a bit of a cuss word, basically, and but it was in a very, very kind of progressive kind of interpretation of it. And someone who was an ex-Muslim, who was a fluent Arabic speaker, came up and was like, I can't believe you just did this. This is essentially a bigoted surah, a chapter. And this person was obviously quite mad because, you know, being accused of being bigoted does that. But it made me think, because I was like, actually, this person is a literalist. And so that surah, it's difficult to actually say it's not about the disbeliever. And the concepts around disbeliever in Islam are bigoted. It is the other, right? So I get the concept that there are different viewpoints on Islam, but until they're not literalist, it's very difficult to change anything, right? But at the same time, I mean, I come across sort of different interpretations, like very Sufi interpretations, or, you know, some Mu'tazili interpretations and things like that. And I have time for them to listen and things and whatnot. But fundamentally, for me, the way Islam is practiced is literal for most people. And unless you can get away from saying the Quran is the direct word of God, it's always got that element of, you know, these things happen. Exactly, yeah. The hadith is a whole new ballgame as well, because the hadith is where you get into trouble. So a lot of ex-Muslims, what happens with them is, initially they don't want to leave Islam because it's difficult. So they become Quran-only ex-Muslims, where they practice from just reading the Quran, which, because it's more poetic, has more variance, but not that much, but it does. The hadith are very contextualized, so you get to read about what happened to the Banu Qurayza, where, you know, everyone with any pubic hair was murdered, basically, and things like that. So once you get past that hadith, it's a little bit easier, but then by that time, because the way the hadith was relayed was similar to the Quran, they're essentially...
more than that, the Quran doesn't make sense without the hadith.
Yeah, well, you don't know how to pray otherwise. You know, there's three, I think there's 3 prayers in the Quran, there's 5 in hadith. So you can see how I'm cool listening to it, but it's not very difficult to explain why within a literal context that's difficult to understand. If we talk about non-literalism, and this is where we might disagree sometimes, I do believe that reform could come with non-literalism. Whether tactically, I don't know, but I think it could within Islam.
So the issue is that will non-literalism even happen?
Exactly, yeah, and who knows to that. So that's kind of my take on it.
To give you a very specific example, in the Quran, chapter 4, verse 34, is about beating your wife. And it says something along the lines of, if your wife is disobedient, do X, Y, and beat her. and until she is no longer disobedient. Like the entire verse is misogynist, obedient, disobedient wife, and then what often people do is the word beat does not mean beat, it means a variety of other things.
Or it was like with a feather.
Yeah, feather beating is best beating. In any case, so there's a feminist scholar that was trying to create a feminist version of the Quran, translating it from Arabic. I think she was Irani, and she had a lot of trouble with that verse. And there was a New York Times article about her work, and in that she said she spent nearly a year trying to find an alternative meaning for that verse. She went through hundreds of dictionaries, and so she's putting all this effort to distort what it literally says. So she's still sticking with that text. Why can't we simply say that, okay, the rest of it sounds good to me, but this particular verse I disagree with. Like simply, I disagree with this part of the Quran, period. That is immensely powerful.
And just to say, like, really quickly, it is so important that we can have this conversation, because actually, I think even as a Muslim, when I was a Muslim, it was very difficult to have that conversation honestly and openly with people. And I'm finding more and more Muslims now do come up to me and go, hey, I've got these questions. And, you know, I'm like, hey, I don't want to make you leave your faith, but we can talk about it openly. And it's interesting. It's actually quite interesting, because
I'm happy to have that conversation.
It's an important part of it was, you know, yeah. So.
We have time for one more question.
And we'll be around as well afterwards a little bit if you guys have more questions. We've rambled a little bit, so.
Oops, I think it's not it. I have a question about shunning. So I think that, you know, families have an easier time accepting their child if the community is removed. So I was wondering, have you thought about making these conversations in Muslim spaces? I know it's very difficult, but I think, you know, if you can remove the community aspect and you can have a conversation with parents themselves that are dealing with this issue, it might be more effective. But have you...
Which community are you from? What's your ethnic background?
So Pakistani.
Okay. What do Pakistanis do to each other what happens when Mudathir across the road has left Islam? Every single family in that community will know about it. That's the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, at least in my experience, I advise people to try to do that, to try to move their parents from talking to other families, but you can't. It's just very difficult. And
there are support networks. There are social circles. You can't really easily do that. Regarding going into Muslim spaces and having this conversation, I'd be happy to do that. We all would be happy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that down the road, as like we have Muslims here that are talking about this, even if they disagree with us, which is great, that eventually we'll get to the point where we'll start having these conversations within Muslim context. And to a great extent, this is a problem that will need to be solved by Muslims, because in Pakistan, it's a quote-unquote democracy, regardless of how uneven it is. If you're going to remove the parts of the constitution that are bigoted, frankly, you need to convince the people that are already there. So we need to talk to Muslims, and we need to enlist them in reforming what's going on. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming. I hope you guys had fun. We definitely did. Thank you.